And Frank, I'll let you open things up.
Of course.
Even though
So, very good. Yeah, so welcome to the My Home is Your Home Gallery Talk with James Porter for M Galleries P&A. So thank you everybody for joining, and I'm going to turn it over to James for his presentation. So go ahead, James.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
I assume everyone can see that. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out to come to this talk related to My Home is Your Home, my installation at M Galleries P&A. And I wanted to start off with some thank yous. First off, thank you, Frank May, for the opportunity to do this show, which would not have happened except for your invitation. The whole concept came about as a result of your invitation. Also, Lane Dalton. Frank and Lane have been taking care of the space, which has a bunch of plants in it that need watering, and they've been letting me into the space at odd hours, and so I really appreciate their support. Also, yeah.
James, you're very welcome. Thank you, and it's been a pleasure, and thank you. Absolutely.
Thank you. And also, Yana has helped out with that as well. I wanted to also thank my sister, Ellie Trubert, who collaborated with me in installing this show, and my friend Scott Johnson, who helped to transport the work down, and my son, Houston Porter, who helped a lot with the framing of this work, which you'll see there's a lot of frames in this installation, and also my brother-in-law, Sylvain, for housing me during my visits. So during this talk, I'm going to give a short introduction to myself and my work, and then kind of walk you through some examples of work that's influenced me in this process of creating this installation, and then finally walk you through the installation itself. And at the end, we'll have time for some Q&A, some questions, and yeah, so let's get started. For you folks who are in New Jersey, who maybe I haven't met, I did grow up in New Jersey, in Mendham, New Jersey, in Morris County, and currently live in the Mid-Hudson Valley. And so this show represents a kind of a homecoming on the theme of home. And there are kind of three key practices in my overarching practice. So there's the creative practice, which involves visual art, and also music and writing. And I also have a social practice related to my career, which it has been in the field of social work for about 30 years, and also offering workshops to teenagers, and also a spiritual practice, which mainly focuses on meditation, and also 12-step recovery. And so something I've been thinking about for a while is how these three different practices can come together rather than kind of traveling side by side. And I think that has really happened in this installation, as I think you'll see. All three are kind of alive in this work. Yeah, so here we have the beautiful M Galleries P&A building, which is very cabin-like. This show really bridges life and art, gallery space and home space. And so you can see that right away in the building, which again was part of the inspiration for this theme of the show. And there's a long history of artists looking to merge these two areas, life and art, to collapse the separation between the two of them. And I'm sort of placing myself in that lineage. And I'll give you some examples of that practice. So first we have Pierre Monreal's studio, which I think was a couple of years ago. I first saw a photograph of this. Many of you will be familiar with his work, but it's amazing just to see this studio that completely integrates the artwork into the room. And so you can make out distinct paintings, but also walls that are sort of functioning as walls and as paintings, furniture that mirrors the paintings, both in shape and color. And it's his studio, but it's this very kind of salon-like space. It looks pretty cozy and inviting. And so there's this sense of actually being inside of his work in the space. So I find the space really inspiring. More recently, this is a show that I attended back in 2021 of Sarah Kane's work. And so here the floor is actually a painting. So you're walking around the space, you're walking inside of a painting. The furniture is a painting. You sit on the couch, you're sitting on a painting. And the individual paintings, which are all distinct and grab your attention, they mirror the palette of the furniture, of the floor. And so there's a sense of being encompassed by the artwork and of kind of living within it. Although the kind of art quotient of that art life hybrid is much kind of louder than the life hybrid, the life portion. And you can even lie inside of a painting, as my friend did when we visited the space. That's Scott, who helped move the work to New Jersey. And this is another installation also at the Tang Teaching Museum by Nicole Cherubini, who's a ceramicist mostly. And when I visited this space, I had no idea that this installation was going to be there. And I stepped into the space and there were two people sitting in chairs and having a conversation. And it turned out that one of those folks was Nicole Cherubini. And so I actually sat in this space that she had created as the artist and had about a half-hour conversation with her about the work, about the concept of this installation, and sharing my impressions, which was an experience that really made a strong impression on me. And her intention was to create a community space, a space for conversation, reflection, and interaction. And the space itself is made up of her artwork, as you can see, plants, the work of other artists. There's a fiber work by Lenore Tawney you can see here. And so it's quite interrelated in the material aspect of it, all of these sort of different parts, different artists, different materials, etc. And so that has made a strong impression on me. And honestly, in putting together my show, I wasn't really thinking about any of these other shows, but as I put together this talk, I realized, oh yes, there was that show that I saw. So apparently, these experiences were cooking in my subconscious. And so again, here's our cabin of M Galleries P&A. And so the concept of the show, before I lead you in the door, really was initiated by concern about the level of distrust, fragmentation, alienation that we're experiencing in our country, especially right now, in contrast to ancient practices and practices that are still happening in some countries today of welcoming someone who's might be perceived as deeply other to you, welcoming a stranger as someone who may be a god appearing at your door or an angel appearing at your door, and offering them the best seat in the house, the best food, even if you are poor, making every effort to treat them with immense respect. And so in contrast to the way that when we see someone who has a different race or religion or politics with us, we may tend to treat them with suspicion or fear. And so this installation, the intention was to create a space of welcome, where anyone walking in the door would feel a sense of comfort, relaxation, ease, a kind of playfulness as well. And my intention also, maybe different than the works we just looked at, was that art and life, the aspects that are home and life related, like furniture, stereo, etc., would be in balance with the artwork rather than one being louder than the other, so that there could be this kind of meld or synergy, a kind of both and experience where both aspects are creating something larger than just the one. So most everything in this space is upcycled. All of the frames I gathered up at local thrift shops over a period of time. The furniture was either hand-me-down or stuff I found at the thrift shop. The stereo actually was my parents' stereo, a lot of used records, etc. And this is part of this value of interrelationship and interconnectedness, which is for me about that spiritual place where I experience that sense of interconnectedness and interrelatedness to myself, to nature, to the creation around me. And out of respect for that and watching the kind of impacts of our production-oriented society, wanting to have a low impact, a small carbon footprint when it comes to creating this work. So there's a lot of stuff here, but it's all either upcycled or recyclable. And there's this great quote that I have up in my studio, which is, "What is essential is invisible to the eye." And that's by the author of The Little Prince, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. So there's a lot of material goods in the space, but what I've tried to do is to use these material items to make interrelatedness palpable. So if you look just at this selection of artwork on the wall, it's all quite varied. And yet there's a sense of interconnection that I hope comes to the fore. And so something that you can't see becomes palpable, this sense of interrelatedness, interconnection, which I find so important and which our materialistic society kind of overlooks. So this focus on the invisible, on spaces between, is kind of a bit of an obsession of mine. I find that in my work, I'm constantly kind of searching out new hybrids, new ways to combine things that reveal new connections. And so, as I said, there are many here. There's abstraction and representation. There's plant life and human life. There's fine art, there's kitsch. They're free items, they're items that are for sale. They're old and new items, and they're also interactive and participatory items, and items that are meant just to be viewed. So there's this kind of pileup of hybridity, I'll call it, of in-between spaces, and that kind of liminal or in-between space opens a kind of portal to possibility, is my experience. That there's a sense of potential that's opened up by these, by joining together two things that don't necessarily, at least in our idea, fit together. And so I've created, I've kind of remade some of the juxtapositions on the wall so you can see them more closely. So this is a painting, a drawing, a collage, another painting. And so the sense of pattern and color and image interacting. And here's another ensemble. This is called Beetle Papa Wheelie, Elvis Osiris, and a definite maybe. So one of the interactive elements or participatory elements is the stereo, where folks can come in and choose a record, and in that way participate in the space, also contribute, collaborate with me as the artist by creating a soundtrack for the visual art. And there are also, as Frank mentioned, there's a collection of free mugs that I've been collecting over a period of a couple of months. Folks can pick out a mug for themselves and use that for their water rather than a paper cup, and take that mug home. There's our mug station. A few more views. And they've walked all the way around the room. And you can see this relationship between the Afghan, the pattern of the Afghan, and the pattern of this watercolor. And so in this gallery home space, this art life space, the participant, the viewer, the visitor is really centered. This couch sits in the middle of the room. And when folks come and visit, I invite them to sit on the couch and have a portrait taken. And so this is a three-generation family that came. And I love how this young man is pointing a remote at me as I take the picture. And my sister's child, Elle, and their partner, Danny. You'll recognize Frank May, the gallerist, who can read 2 books at once, and Lee Dalton. We also, at the opening, had a beanbag toss tournament. And so here's the tournament happening. The trophy that was offered to the winner, the disappointed loser, my brother-in-law Silva, and our winner, Susan. And so again, trying to create that playful, home-like space of enjoyment. Here we are back at the outside of the beautiful M Galleries P&A. So when we first arrived at this space, my sister and my friend Scott and I, right out front was a turtle. And there's my sister and Scott with said turtle. And, you know, it seems significant, at least for me, when I see an animal in this way at a significant moment, I pay attention. And so I started to think about, well, what is the significance, the symbolism of a turtle? And this turtle, when I took the picture, he seems to be looking at the camera and kind of posing, right? Almost like he has something to say. And so over the course of these last 3 weeks, I've been kind of contemplating, you know, what is the significance of turtle? How is it related to the show? And of course, the obvious thing is that a turtle carries its home on its back. And in that sense, it's always at home within itself. It carries its home wherever it goes, and it has that sense of belonging, metaphorically, or at homeness within itself. And is always protected and safe. And so I started to think of this turtle or turtle medicine in terms of my own life and my own journey towards feeling at home within myself, feeling a sense of belonging. And realize that really this show, it's like I've created this home up around myself, not a shell for hiding in, but the expression of my inner life. It's sort of this ideal home for me, the home that lives inside of me that I've now kind of outpictured and can spend time within. Similar to the experience I had with Nicole Cherubini, who also, like me, loved to hang out in that space, came frequently, brought guests, etc. And you know, having created that sense of home for myself, of course, I'm also offering it to other people so they can hopefully have that same sense of enjoyment, at homeness within themselves, ease, belonging. And I will just say that this is not the exact same turtle, but another box turtle. That part of the intention with the diversity of the artwork is a kind of metaphor for social diversity. This hope that we can be an inclusive society where, as different as we all are, we can also have a coherent sense of unity and community. It's a tall order right now, but the way that I have included diverse work, the way I've arranged it is intended to kind of push the envelope of that. You know, how diverse can the work be and still feel coherent, still feel related and connected? And so the work itself kind of serving as nodes in a field that I hope sets up a kind of interrelatedness in the atmosphere that encourages interrelatedness in the space and in the visitors. And so thank you for coming to this somewhat short artist talk. And now we'll welcome your questions. Thank you, folks.
I have a question, James.
Yes.
Also, for the record, that picture was taken right before the turtle peed all over me.
I love it.
I thought I wouldn't mention that, but thank you.
Use the word playful a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about the role of humor in your work, because I think that's a big part of a lot of your work.
Yeah, thank you. So, I just completed an MFA program in January, and part of my kind of realization over the course of those 2 years was coming to understand that art could be humorous and playful and still be serious art. Like, I had this idea that art couldn't be fun, it couldn't make you smile or laugh and be art with a capital A. But I came to see that that a moment of humor, especially over the last 2 years, could be an incredible gift for people. And that I believe that humor is a kind of enlightenment, that those moments of humor where we laugh, we forget ourselves in a positive way, or we become deeply related to other people. So it has this unitive quality. It naturally sets up interrelatedness. Humor does, and also as part of my own development, I love to joke, I love to laugh, I love to pun, and so I've just decided that I get to include that in my art because it gives me joy.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
James, I'm interested in this situation of diversity, and what you just said. Laughter is one of those things that fractures in and of itself. That's like a natural divide, a natural mark of different moments passing, and I see that emphasis. There's something like very poetic about the inclusion of humor with such a serious and sincere topic as wanting to facilitate community, to find joy and laughter in that as a sense of rupture and diversity that mirrors the installation and the conceptual arguments made in the show. It's extremely pleasing to see that utilized in such a serious way, because I think you just said it. It's really hard for art to be about laughter and also carry those teeth that make us think afterwards. And I think that you've totally at least for me, have successfully done that. I love how many remotes there are on the table.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Yeah. Humor does an interesting thing. For instance, a pun kind of sets two meanings side by side that are contrary. And in doing that, it's similar to what I described with in between spaces or liminal space. It creates this space between that opens up a possibility. And you can't fix a pun. It's both things at once. You can't make it one or the other.
Yeah, like particle wave experiment, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
I heard somebody else trying to come in.
Oh, well, I had some impressions to relay. First off, and some questions. I was absolutely blown away by the installation in the best way possible. I love the artistic statement that is made by your work, but the one thing that's the real takeaway for me is the humanitarian component of your work. What the installation says as a whole about inclusion and about making people feel welcome, using your home as a point of connection, real connection with people. It's truly what you've done with the space it's so creative that my question is, when you were putting together the show, were you aware of what the space looked like before you began your curation process? Or did you have a variety of works that you just brought not knowing what would be used? Like, did you have a plan going into it for that particular space? Because the installation is so perfectly done for that space. I mean, the photographs show it, but when you are in it, there's nothing that's off. It's like it was meant to be there.
Thank you, Lane. I appreciate that. Yeah, well, it's kind of a combination of all of it you just described. So I knew what space I was working with, but I really had no idea what I was going to do exactly, or even exactly what the theme was. I just kind of kept making work and trusted that in making work and this kind of haptic knowing, coming to know by making, that I would come to an understanding of the concept of the show. And when it came to installing the show, I had about 50 pieces. I chose to leave some of it behind, knowing by the measurements that it wouldn't fit. But part of the intention was that I would not have a plan for hanging the work, and that it would be hung collaboratively. And so that collaboration ended up being with my sister Ellie. And that's part of the spirit of the show, that it's interactive, participatory, interrelated. And so the two of us kind of intuitive what went where. And hanging this much work, you really can't do by yourself. You have to have somebody either holding it and somebody saying a little to the left or whatever. But that was definitely an intention, that there would be an improvisation in the installation of the show. And there was this moment where we had all the work on the wall, or mostly, and we moved the furniture around a little bit, and something in the space just settled, and I could feel it very palpably, sort of like, whoomp. And it had that sense of just being set perfectly, like it was meant to be that way, as you described it.
Yes.
And so
Yes,
it kind of
it was
set
amazing.
up that field that I described, is how it felt to me. I felt a field of energy around me.
It is very, yes, it has its own energy. That is an excellent way to describe it. I also love the way you incorporated all of the window spaces. It's almost like the installation extends far beyond the borders of the interior walls. It goes out into the arboretum, into the tree lines. I loved that continuation of nature. It's outside and it's inside, and then it moves back outside as you're moving through the installation. It was wonderful. Frank and I had time there, not just taking, we're taking care of the plants, but the main thing is one day we just got up and we were like, what do you want to do? Because we have Sundays off, and we were like, let's go to James's house. Let's go to the Arboretum. And we had our breakfast there, and we opened up the door to the Arboretum and just listened to the birds, and, put Miles Davis on the record player. And it felt like we were at home, but better.
I love that.
I want to hang out with you guys.
You do.
That sounds great.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. When I had finished setting it up, I was like, this is nicer than my house. I want to stay here. In fact, Frank and I looked into whether I could actually spend the night in the space, but the powers that be said, no thanks.
Oh, that's a shame. That would have been even more wonderful.
Well, that actually kind of stems from a question I wanted to ask you, James, is that how is this different from your home? Like what's the gap, between, if any? Is this how you would set up your living space, or is there some kind of other thought process that is involved?
Well, it's definitely related, and some of the pieces were actually in my living area. Others were in the basement in kind of a casual living area, or the studio. In my own home, I wouldn't put up this much of my artwork
Well, why not?
I don't think I need to see that much of my artwork, and I would rather see other folks' artwork. And I think my home has less of a kind of kitschy, thrift shoppy kind of feel to it. It feels a little more formal. That's part of the humor of the space, and I think the accessibility of the space, the way that people can feel comfortable there, as it is all kind of broken in and secondhand and kind of quirky. So that's a little different than my house.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah, James, I was wondering what the range of reactions has been from visitors.
Yeah. Great question. It's interesting. People have felt very at home and have sat down and had lengthy conversations with me. That's happened a bunch of times. And so this sense of like the artwork really being almost like decoration in a home rather than the focal point has happened. I mean, people look at the art and they talk about it, but they seem to move right away into social space, into the sense of being invited into a home and feeling comfortable. And so I kind of realized, going back to Nicole Cherubini and meeting her in her space, that I'm actually part of this installation. That not that it can't happen when I'm not there, but that my presence, my welcoming people, my engaging people, my inviting people to participate with the records or the mugs is a part of it. And that's the social practice aspect of it, or another aspect of the social practice. So yeah, it felt really good to like fully step into welcoming people, and people really felt that. And one person who came in and seemed to be kind of uncomfortable and walked around quickly and didn't want to sit down and have her picture taken said, "Thank you so much for welcoming me so much into the space." I'm not making that about myself, but just, I think it was more me kind of responding to the intention of the space. Like I kind of fell in line with what the space is. Yeah.
I have a second question.
Great.
So there's this artist, Joshua Citarella, who works with online communities and does like work about radicalization. And there was just a drama that happened where he got very involved with the community and shared his philosophy and his values. And then the member of the community, he didn't like how they behaved, so he sent them a cease and desist letter. And there's this sense that in his practice, he's taken this idea of radicalization, this idea of like giving an experience that is radically different than another experience that works directly on our need and desire for community and for shared affirmation. And what I think is so important that you just said is that you activate that space. And I think it's what he didn't do, is he didn't stay with that community after giving all of this incredibly empowering and potentially life-changing information. And then he wrote an article about it and made it like a academic project, which is sort of dehumanizing for those people. So I'm curious if you thought about radicalization, especially in our landscape politically now.
So, I mean, I think some of the work that I was pursuing in my MFA had more radical intentions and had intentions to disrupt. I think this work is radical in its own way, but it aims to do that in a way that's very accessible and maybe kind of slowly permeates you rather than taking you by the lapels. And so to me, it's an invitation, and people can go as far into it and as deep into the connection with me in conversation as they want to. It's an open space for people to experience and go with in whatever way they want. So I don't have an agenda except to open a space that feels safe for people to be themselves and hopefully connect, maybe beyond their bubbles. And that's the thing with some participatory art, not participatory, but social practice, is that it ends up feeling like an experiment's been done on the community. And I was really trying to avoid that. I'm not trying to manipulate, I'm just opening a space. and I'm participating in it too, and people get to collaborate in the space. At the same time, that some social practice, the artist completely lets go of their own creative practice, and I didn't want to do that either. So I've tried to, include my own creative practice, include the social practice element, and have another kind of space between, have them coexist.
No, it's really interesting. And I think it's really successful. I've been thinking a lot about modernist myths of revolution, given our political situation and the midterms coming up. And there was a David Hammond's piece that went up right after 9/11, and he basically got a blacked out gallery and a bunch of flashlights, and there was no work in the space. The entire thing was going in with a flashlight, exploring and emerging, and it mirrors that process of sort of like inner radical, becoming like an inner revolution. And I think the main problem with that modernist myth is that the whole desire is linked to control. And this is the failure of Joshua Cittarella's project, and sort of the success with yours is that it allows for that radicality without dictating what that is. And I'm very excited by that.
Yeah, I'll just say that there's a danger in welcoming people into your home. That's a real thing. So there's also that edge.
Yeah.
Thanks, Holly. Other questions or comments?
James, there are a couple in the chat from Marianne.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So Marianne says, I also felt this comfort level coming into the space. I also felt that I was in an area for a shared support group due to the couch placement and the chairs placement, which reveals the artist's social work coming through these. Yeah. So that's interesting. The couch definitely evokes, I think, Freud's couch, which has, throws and pillows and such. And so, yeah, I think that's in the space. I'm not a therapist, but there was a kind of a counseling-like vibe to some of the conversations for sure. Yep. And there's another.
Yeah, James, there's another comment about the remotes. If you want to go scroll up, that Marianne made, that I thought was interesting.
Nice. So I'll read that too. I like the idea of so many remotes as a singular sculpture about choice of control. The remote controls, and yet with so many remotes, no devices, it was very Taoist to read that there is no control, and the acceptance of that is key. I love that interpretation. That piece is called Remote Possibility. And so, there's a pun in there. And just as you pointed to, that it's just a funny thing to have 14 remotes with no technology that they're connected to. And, one kid who came in made that comment, what are the remotes for? Someone who saw them on Instagram said, what's with the remotes? So it's sort of this, there's a frustration and also, remotes are quickly becoming obsolete. And so they become this technology that has no purpose. I haven't quite cracked the code of that piece myself, but I just find it really interesting. And it's also about interrelatedness, these different remotes and collections of which I'm a collector for sure and make collections. Any other questions in the chat that I missed? Looks like that's it. Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, the one thought I had, or thinking about the space, I'm curious about, it's almost as if it was like also a kind of a time machine, maybe going back, so were you thinking about like the temporal part of it, like going back, like with the record player and, removal of all kind of contemporary technology, was like, subtracted from that space. So it feels like I went back, a few decades, when I entered the space too. Was that a factor?
Yeah, I think the space is kind of nostalgic. And it seems to be kind of circa 70s or early 80s.
Exactly. Yeah.
And for me, It's different for everyone depending on your age, but there's a sort of a comfort in that. There's a familiarity, and there's also a humor, which I think can contribute to that sense of being at home, feeling at ease, something recognizable. But there's also, it kind of opens up a space because it's referencing the past and it's also in the present. Old frames that seem like very 70s and 80s with new work. Old things reconfigured into a new space. There's something that's opened up by that kind of adjacency. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it certainly does. Yeah, and the other thought I had just during the talk, I realized that we had such a missed opportunity. We could have set the sign up to be like an open house, like I'm a real estate agent. I should have designed something maybe next time we do the show. So I love when those ideas come in kind of too late. But but I was thinking that it would have been fun to kind of play up that whole that we're showing a house, right?
I think we'd have to find an avocado colored polyester suit for you, Frank.
That's right. I'm right. Exactly. I'm an agent from the 70s.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. One of the things I noticed in giving this talk, first of all, I learned so much about my work by talking about it or preparing to talk about it, but I feel so much more comfortable and at ease when I'm in conversation with people. I feel a sense of dis-ease when I'm in that presentation mode, which is didactic in one way. And so it just kind of speaks to, my need for connection and how connection feeds me. Any other further questions or comments before we wrap up?
Hey, James, it's Jess.
Hey, Jess.
For you. But first, I just want to tell you that as someone lucky enough to attend your opening, I really enjoyed it. I feel like it was so much more than an installation. Although your work is fabulous, I really enjoyed the experience of it. And I was quite surprised at myself even. I felt very connected, not only to you as the artist, but also to friends and strangers alike. And, as an introvert, that is not at all what I typically feel when I go viewing art in public. So I really appreciated that. And I just loved it. It was amazing.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And thanks again for coming down. Which makes me think about, I love what you said. And I came across this term some years ago called an experience architect. And I like to think of myself as an experienced architect, that I've architected an experience. And it sounds like you have that experience. So that's great.
Yeah, that was actually, I remember we had that discussion about that when going into the space, it completely transformed it was such a unique space that you carved out, and it was almost like the concept of welcoming was the paramount work. It's not even the objects in there that was the focal point. It's like the concept of welcoming was the performative artwork that people were experiencing, like that abstraction of welcoming, which I think was really masterful, in for you on your part to kind of cultivate that.
Oh, thank you, Frank. That's really helpful to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I felt more like a house guest and an invited guest than I did, a viewer of art, which was great. So, but I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
So my question is, given the choice of anyone in the world, who would you want as a dinner guest?
Oh, that's great.
So one of the elements, and I will answer that question, but one of the elements in the show is a handout of the 36 questions, which were created by a psychologist as part of a study to see if they could create intimacy between two strangers just in exchanging questions. So it's this series of 36 questions. And I would have to say that I'll go with the first person who popped into my head, which is the artist Robert Rauschenberg, who I first came upon his work at a retrospective in 1978 at MoMA when I was 14 years old. And his work just completely blew me away and has ever since. And I would love to invite him into this home and hang out with him and have a conversation. So definitely him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Katie.
Well, James, I have to say, I see the past Jamie, I see the present James, and I also see the future James. I'm thrilled, and I think it's very exciting. I'm proud of you.
Well, thank you.
And just remember that your puns could be termed father jokes too.
Dad jokes for sure, which I come by those naturally from my own dad. Thanks, Mom.
Hey, James, it's Matt. I just wanted to say it was really good, this whole the talk and everything, and I didn't get down to Jersey to see it, but it was making me think of a lot of things, like the comfort of being, you know, just you walking around showing the works. And I was thinking, well, you know, sometimes it's not as comfortable in a museum. Like there were no guards in it here, right? You don't have guards. And how rarefied art has become, where to the point, you know, I went to MoMA, well, on there lots of times. The last time I went and I was looking at, I don't know why I bring this up, but Starry Night, Van Gogh's Starry Night, and I couldn't believe, like, you know, there was a bunch of people standing right in front of it, and I was saying, is that really the original one? Just there, 12 inches from anybody? And it was just pretty amazing that they can still do that. Yeah. But oh my God, imagine if you were to touch those. I mean, I'm sure people are allowed to touch your pieces, right? But I don't know. It was really nice. I like the whole thing, your whole idea behind, concept behind your work and everything. And I'm really glad you were able to do this. I know you put a lot of work into, you know, school and putting this show together. So congratulations.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we may be wrapping up. I will just mention that the show ends on the 29th. It's getting picked up or packed up on the 30th of this month. And I am looking for a home for My Home Is Your Home in the Hudson Valley. So if you know of a pop-up space or even a gallery space that might be interested, please be in touch with me. And otherwise, I guess I'll just, at this point, thank you all for coming. This is such a pleasure. And
yeah, thank you, everybody.
And have a great rest of your evening.
Yes. Thank you, James.
Well done.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye for now.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
So long.
Take care.